Marcus Williams was down to his last dollar when he saw the boy crying in the empty hallway, too proud to admit he was starving. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in Jefferson Elementary as Marcus pushed his mop bucket down the quiet corridor. It was well past 6 in the evening, and most of the teachers had long gone home to their families. The school felt different after hours, heavy with silence and the lingering echoes of childhood laughter that had filled these halls just hours before. Marcus moved methodically, his worn sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. At 42, his shoulders carried more than just the weight of his janitor's uniform. 3 years had passed since Sarah died, and every day still felt like walking through fog. His daughter Emma was waiting for him at Mrs. Rodriguez's house, probably doing homework at the kitchen table or playing with the neighbor's cat. Emma was 8 now, with her mother's bright green eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of Marcus's world. She never complained about the long hours he worked, or the second-hand clothes, or the fact that their apartment was barely bigger than some people's closets. She was his everything, his reason for getting up each morning and pushing through another day of endless floors and empty classrooms. Marcus reached into his pocket and felt the crumpled dollar bill. $1. That was all that stood between them and complete emptiness, until his next paycheck on Friday. 3 more days. He had done the math a dozen times, counting and recounting the coins scattered across their kitchen table the night before. Rent was paid, thank God, but groceries were a luxury they could not afford this week. Again, the sound of sniffling stopped him mid-stride. Marcus looked up from his mop and listened. There it was again, soft and muffled, coming from somewhere ahead. He left his bucket and walked quietly toward the sound, his footsteps careful and deliberate. Near the library entrance, huddled against the wall with his knees drawn up to his chest, sat a boy Marcus recognized from the 4th grade classes, Tommy Chen. The kid was maybe 9 years old, small for his age, with black hair that fell across his face as he tried to hide his tears. "Hey there," Marcus said gently, crouching down to the boy's level. "You okay, son?" Tommy looked up, startled. His cheeks were red and streaked with tears, and there was something in his eyes that Marcus recognized immediately. Shame. The kind of shame that came from wanting something you could not have, from being hungry in a world full of people who had never missed a meal. "I'm fine," Tommy whispered, wiping his nose with the back of his sleeve. Marcus sat down on the floor beside him, ignoring the dampness that seeped through his work pants. "Mind if I sit here for a minute? My back's been killing me all day." Tommy shrugged, but did not move away. The hallway was quiet, except for the distant hum of the heating system and the occasional car passing by outside. "You know," Marcus said after a moment, "when I was about your age, I used to hide in hallways too, usually when something was bothering me that I did not want to talk about." The boy glanced at him sideways. "What kind of stuff?" "Oh, all kinds of things. Sometimes I was scared. Sometimes I was sad. Sometimes I was just hungry and did not want anyone to know." Tommy's shoulders tensed, and Marcus knew he had hit close to home. "Being hungry is nothing to be ashamed of," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It happens to good people all the time." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tommy's voice came out small and broken. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was like taking a punch to the gut. "Where are your parents, Tommy?" "My dad's working a double shift at the factory. He does not get paid until Friday. Mom's at home with the baby, but she's sick and can't work right now." Tommy's words came out in a rush, as if he had been holding them in for too long. "Dad told me not to tell anyone. He said things would get better soon." Marcus knew that feeling, the desperate hope that things would turn around, that next week would be different, that somehow the bills would pay themselves and the refrigerator would magically fill itself with food. He reached into his pocket and felt the dollar bill between his fingers. $1. The difference between Emma having something for dinner tonight and going to bed hungry, but looking at Tommy, Seeing the way the boy's clothes hung loose on his thin frame, seeing the hollow look in his eyes that no child should ever have, Marcus knew there was no choice to be made. "Tell you what," Marcus said, pulling out the crumpled bill. "There's a vending machine in the teacher's lounge. How about we go get you something to eat?" Tommy's eyes widened. "I can't take your money, Mr. Williams. You are not taking it. I am giving it to you. There is a difference. But what if you need it?" Marcus smiled, though it felt like his heart was breaking. "I have got everything I need right here. Come on." They walked together to the teacher's lounge, Tommy's footsteps light and hesitant beside Marcus's steady stride. The vending machine hummed in the corner, its bright display showing rows of snacks and sandwiches. Marcus fed the dollar into the machine and let Tommy choose. The boy selected a turkey sandwich and a small bag of chips, his hands shaking slightly as he made his choices. "Thank you," Tommy said as the sandwich dropped into the slot. His voice was thick with emotion. "I'll pay you back. I promise." "No need for that," Marcus said. "Just promise me you will tell a teacher if this happens again. Okay? There are people here who want to help." Tommy nodded, unwrapping the sandwich with the careful reverence of someone who understood the value of every bite. Marcus watched him eat, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the school's heating system. Later that night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table staring at an empty wallet and trying to figure out how to make nothing stretch until Friday. Emma was asleep in their tiny bedroom, her breathing soft and steady in the darkness. She had eaten the last of their cereal for dinner and had not asked for seconds, though Marcus could see she was still hungry. 8 years old, and already learning to make do with less. He opened the refrigerator and stared at its mostly empty shelves. A half-empty jar of peanut butter, some condiments, and a few slices of bread that were starting to go stale. Tomorrow he would have to get creative. Maybe Mrs. Rodriguez would let Emma eat breakfast at her house. Maybe he could find some loose change in the couch cushions. Marcus closed the refrigerator and sat back down at the table. His phone buzzed with a text from his brother in California asking how things were going. Marcus typed back that everything was fine, then deleted the message and wrote instead that they were doing well. Another small lie to protect his pride. Another wall between him and the help he desperately needed, but could not bring himself to ask for. The next morning at Jefferson Elementary, word had somehow gotten around about Marcus giving money to Tommy Chen. Marcus was mopping the cafeteria floor when he overheard two teachers talking near the lunch line. "Did you hear about Marcus?" whispered Mrs. Patterson, the third-grade teacher. "Gave his last dollar to that Chen boy yesterday." "His last dollar?" replied Mr. Henderson from 5th grade. "How does he know it was his last?" "Because everyone knows Marcus is broke. Has been since his wife died. I heard he can barely make rent." Marcus pretended not to hear, focusing on the rhythmic motion of his mop across the linoleum. But their words stung more than he cared to admit. "Honestly," Mrs. Patterson continued, "it was sweet and all, but kind of foolish, don't you think? I mean, he has his own daughter to think about." "Some people just do not think ahead," Mr. Henderson said, with a shake of his head. "Good heart, but no sense." Marcus felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. They were not wrong. He did have Emma to think about, and giving away their last dollar had been impractical at best, reckless at worst. But when he remembered the look in Tommy's eyes, the shame and hunger that he recognized so well, he knew he would do it again. Throughout the morning, Marcus noticed the looks. Some teachers nodded at him with approval, while others seemed to avoid eye contact altogether. A few whispered when they thought he was not listening. By lunchtime, it felt like the entire school knew about his moment of what some called generosity and others called foolishness. Principal Johnson called him into her office just before the final bell. "Marcus," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk, "please, sit down." Marcus perched on the edge of the chair, his work shirt still damp with sweat from the morning's labors. Principal Johnson was a kind woman in her 50s, with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses that made her look both stern and maternal. "I heard about what you did for Tommy Chen yesterday," she began. Marcus braced himself for a lecture about appropriate boundaries or professional conduct. "That was a beautiful thing you did," she continued, surprising him. "Really beautiful." "Thank you, ma'am. But I also heard some talk around the building about your situation." She leaned forward, her expression gentle but concerned. "Marcus, if you are struggling financially, there might be resources available. Programs through the district, or local charities that help school employees." Marcus felt his pride bristle. "I appreciate that, Mrs. Johnson, but we are managing fine." She studied his face for a long moment. "Are you sure? Because there is no shame in accepting help when you need it. You work hard here, Marcus, harder than most. You deserve support when times are tough." "We are okay," Marcus repeated, though the words felt hollow even to him. Mrs. Johnson nodded, but her expression remained skeptical. "Well, if that changes, my door is always open. And Marcus, what you did for Tommy was exactly the kind of thing that makes this school special. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." That afternoon, Marcus walked home with Mrs. Johnson's words echoing in his mind. The October air was crisp, and the leaves were just beginning to turn golden on the trees that lined his street. His neighborhood was not the worst in town, but it was far from the best. Small houses with sagging porches and chain-link fences, cars that had seen better decades, children playing in yards that were more dirt than grass. He stopped by Mrs. Rodriguez's house to pick up Emma. She was sitting at the kitchen table, carefully coloring in a workbook with broken crayons. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, launching herself into his arms. Marcus held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling the tension of the day melt away. This was what mattered. This little girl with her gap-toothed smile and her absolute faith that her father could handle anything the world threw at them. "How was school, sweetheart?" "Good," Mrs. Garcia said. "I am getting really good at reading. And look what I made." She showed him a drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "That is you and me, Daddy." "It is beautiful," Marcus said, his throat tight with emotion. "The most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that Marcus had come to depend on. "Marcus, mijo," she said. "Emma had lunch here today. I made extra rice and beans." Marcus felt that familiar flush of embarrassment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you do not have to." "Nonsense. She is a growing girl, and I always cook too much anyway." She turned to Emma. "Why don't you go get your backpack, mija? I think I saw a cookie in there with your name on it." Emma ran off to the living room, and Mrs. Rodriguez moved closer to Marcus, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Marcus, you look tired. When was the last time you ate a real meal?" "I eat fine, Mrs. Rodriguez." She fixed him with a look that reminded him of his own mother. "I was not asking if you eat. I was asking when you last ate well. There is a difference." Marcus did not have an answer for that. "Listen to me," she continued. "Pride is a good thing, but not when it hurts the people we love. Emma needs her father healthy and strong. If you need help, I can take care of my daughter," Marcus said, more sharply than he intended. Mrs. Rodriguez's expression softened. "I know you can, mijo. You are a good father. But even good fathers sometimes need help." Emma returned with her backpack, breaking the tension. Marcus thanked Mrs. Rodriguez and headed home with his daughter skipping beside him, chattering about her day and oblivious to the adult worries that pressed down on his shoulders. Their apartment was on the second floor of a converted house, 2 small rooms, and a kitchenette that barely qualified as such. But Emma had decorated it with her drawings and school projects, and somehow her presence made even the shabbiest corners feel like home. That evening, Marcus made dinner from what they had. Peanut butter sandwiches on the last of the stale bread, with water to drink. Emma ate without complaint, telling him about her friend Jessica and the new book she was reading and the song they were learning in music class. "Daddy," she said as they cleaned up the dishes, "why do some kids at school have fancy lunchboxes and I have a brown bag?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. "Well, sweetheart, different families do things different ways." "Oh," Emma seemed to consider this. "I like brown bags better anyway. They are easier to draw on." Marcus smiled despite himself. "Leave it to Emma to find the bright side." "Can we read a story tonight?" she asked. Of course. They curled up on the couch with a library book about a brave little mouse. Emma nestled against his side as his voice filled the quiet apartment. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. The moments when he could forget about empty wallets and concerned neighbors, and the weight of trying to be everything to this little girl who deserved so much more than he could give her. The next day brought more whispered conversations and sideways glances. Marcus tried to focus on his work, moving through the school with his usual quiet efficiency. He mopped floors and emptied trash cans and fixed the squeaky door in the second-grade hallway. Normal tasks that felt anything but normal under the weight of everyone's attention. It was during his lunch break that he saw Tommy again. The boy was sitting alone in the cafeteria, staring at an empty lunch tray. Marcus approached carefully, not wanting to embarrass the child. "Hey, Tommy, how are you doing today?" Tommy looked up, his face brightening slightly. "Hi, Mr. Williams. I am okay." But Marcus could see he was not okay. The boy's clothes were the same as yesterday, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of worry and sleepless nights. "Did you bring lunch today?" Marcus asked gently. Tommy shook his head. "Dad's still waiting for his paycheck, but it is okay. I am not that hungry." The lie was so transparent, it made Marcus's heart ache. He looked around the cafeteria, at tables full of children with packed lunches and milk money, at the serving line where hot meals waited for students whose parents could afford them. The divide between the haves and have-nots had never seemed starker. Marcus excused himself and walked to the main office. Mrs. Patterson was there, filing some papers, and she looked up when he entered. "Marcus? Is everything all right?" "Mrs. Patterson, is there a lunch program for kids who qualify for free meals?" "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "There is a student who might need it. Tommy Chen in Mrs. Miller's class." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened with understanding. "I see. Well, his parents would need to fill out an application. There is a process. Income verification, that sort of thing." "How long does that take?" "Usually a few weeks, once we get the paperwork." "A few weeks." Marcus thought about Tommy's hollow cheeks, about the way the boy tried to hide his hunger behind brave smiles and quiet dignity. "Is there anything faster? Some kind of emergency provision?" Mrs. Patterson shook her head. "I wish there was, but the district has rules about these things. Liability issues, you understand." Marcus nodded, though he did not really understand at all. What he understood was that there was a child going hungry, and the people with the power to help were more concerned with paperwork than with empty stomachs. That afternoon, Marcus found himself standing outside the teacher's lounge, staring at the vending machine. He had scrounged through his car and found 37 cents in loose change. Enough for absolutely nothing useful. "Excuse me." Marcus turned to see a man in an expensive suit standing behind him. The stranger was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Everything about him spoke of money and authority. "Are you Marcus Williams?" the man asked. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" "My name is Robert Chen. I believe you know my grandson, Tommy." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Yes, sir. Tommy is a good kid." Robert Chen studied Marcus for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I would like to speak with you, if you have a moment. Perhaps somewhere more private?" They walked to an empty classroom, and Robert Chen closed the door behind them. Marcus remained standing, unsure of what to expect. "Mr. Williams, I owe you an explanation and an apology." Robert's voice was formal, controlled. "Tommy is my grandson, but until yesterday, I did not know where he was." Marcus waited, sensing there was more to the story. My son David and I had a falling out several years ago. Over money, over choices, over pride. Robert's jaw tightened. He moved away with his family, and we lost touch. I have been looking for them for over a year, hiring investigators, checking records. Yesterday, one of those investigators finally tracked them down to this town. I see. When I arrived at their apartment, I found David at work and his wife sick with the flu. The baby was crying, and Tommy was hungry, very hungry. Robert's voice cracked slightly. My grandson was ashamed to tell me how bad things had gotten, but he did tell me about a janitor at his school who gave him food when he had none. A janitor who gave his last dollar to feed a child he barely knew. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. It was not a big deal, Mr. Chen. It was not? Robert stepped closer, his eyes intense. Mr. Williams, do you know what it means for a child to feel abandoned by his family? To go to bed hungry night after night, while the adults around him struggle with their own pride? Marcus thought of Emma, of the peanut butter sandwiches, and the worried look in Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes. I might have some idea. Tommy told me about your kindness. He also told me that other people at the school called you foolish for giving away money you could not afford to lose. Robert's expression hardened. Those people do not understand what real wealth looks like. Mr. Chen, I appreciate you coming by, but I am not finished. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. I want to repay you for what you did for my grandson. That is not necessary. Perhaps not necessary, but absolutely essential. Robert began writing. What you did was not just feed a hungry child, Mr. Williams. You showed him that he mattered, that someone cared enough to sacrifice for him. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Marcus watched, stunned, as Robert wrote numbers on the check. Mr. Chen, really, you do not need to. $25,000, Robert said, tearing off the check and holding it out. I know it is not enough to truly repay what you did, but it is a start. Marcus stared at the check, his vision blurring slightly. $25,000. Enough to pay off debt, to buy Emma new clothes, to put food on the table without counting every penny. Enough to change their lives. I can't accept this, he whispered. Why not? Because I did not do it for money. I did it because it was right. Robert smiled for the first time since Marcus had met him. That, Mr. Williams, is exactly why you deserve it. Marcus looked at the check again, his hands shaking. This is too much. It is not nearly enough, but it is what I can do today. Robert placed the check in Marcus's reluctant hands. There is one condition, though. Marcus's heart sank. What kind of condition? I want you to promise me something. When you see another person in need, someone who needs what you can give, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that sometimes what looks like foolishness to the world looks like wisdom to God. The words hit Marcus like a physical force. God. He had been so focused on getting through each day, on surviving and providing for Emma, that he had almost forgotten about faith, about the possibility that there might be a plan bigger than his struggles, a purpose beyond his daily grind. Mr. Chen, Marcus said slowly, why are you really doing this? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out the classroom window at the playground where children were running and laughing in the afternoon sun. Because I spent years being angry at my son for not living up to my expectations, years letting pride keep me from my family. And in all that time, a stranger showed more love to my grandson than I did. He turned back to Marcus. You gave your last dollar to feed him. Your last dollar, Mr. Williams. When you had nothing, you gave everything. That is not foolishness. That is faith. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. I just saw a hungry kid, and you fed him, just like the Bible says to do, just like Jesus would have done. Robert extended his hand. Thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you for being the kind of man I forgot how to be. They shook hands, and Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a lightness he had not experienced in years. as if a weight he had not even realized he was carrying had suddenly been lifted. After Robert Chen left, Marcus sat alone in the empty classroom, staring at the check in his hands. $25,000. It felt surreal, like something that happened to other people in stories he read to Emma at bedtime. He thought about Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Henderson, about their whispered conversation in the cafeteria. They had called him foolish for giving away his last dollar. And maybe they were right, from a practical standpoint. But sitting there with Robert Chen's check in his hands, Marcus began to understand that there were different kinds of wisdom in the world. The drive home that evening felt different. The same broken streets, the same tired buildings, but somehow everything looked brighter. Marcus found himself smiling at nothing, humming along to the radio, feeling a joy that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside him. Emma was waiting on Mrs. Rodriguez's porch when he pulled up, her backpack slung over her shoulder and a drawing clutched in her small hands. "Daddy, look what I made today!" She ran to him with the unself-conscious enthusiasm that only children possess. Marcus scooped her up in his arms, spinning her around until she giggled. "What did you make, sweetheart?" "It is a picture of our family in heaven, with Mommy. See, there is you, and me, and Mommy with her angel wings." Marcus felt his throat close up as he looked at the drawing. Sarah was indeed depicted with wings, smiling down at stick-figure versions of Marcus and Emma. Above them all, Emma had drawn a bright yellow sun with the word God written in careful second-grade letters. "It is beautiful, Emma. The most beautiful picture I have ever seen. Mrs. Garcia says Mommy is watching over us from heaven, and that God takes care of people who take care of other people." Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus hugged his daughter closer, marveling at the timing of her innocent words. "What do you think about that?" he asked. "I think Mommy told God to send us something good because you are such a nice daddy." Marcus felt tears slip down his cheeks. "You might be right about that, sweetheart." That night, after Emma was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with the check spread out in front of him. He had called the bank to verify its authenticity, half convinced that this was all some elaborate mistake or cruel joke, but the check was real. The account was real. The money was really his. He made a list on the back of an envelope. First, he would pay off their overdue bills. Then he would buy groceries, real groceries, enough to fill their refrigerator and pantry. New clothes for Emma, who had been making do with hand-me-downs that were getting too small. A security deposit on a better apartment, maybe one with 2 bedrooms so Emma could have her own space. But as he wrote, Marcus found himself thinking about Tommy Chen, about the shame in the boy's eyes, and the hollow sound of his empty stomach. He thought about other children at the school, other families struggling to make ends meet while surrounded by people who had more than enough. At the bottom of his list, Marcus wrote, "Help someone else." The next morning at Jefferson Elementary, Marcus went about his usual routine, with a lightness in his step that had not been there in months. He mopped floors and emptied trash cans and wiped down windows, but for the first time in years, he was not counting pennies in his head or worrying about how to stretch nothing into something. During his lunch break, he sought out Principal Johnson. "Mrs. Johnson, do you have a minute?" She looked up from her paperwork and smiled. "Of course, Marcus. What can I do for you?" "I want to start a fund for kids who need lunch money, or school supplies, or whatever." Principal Johnson raised an eyebrow. "That is very generous of you, Marcus, but are you sure you are in a position to—" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 $100 bills. "I want to start it with this." Principal Johnson stared at the money, then at Marcus. "Marcus, where did this come from?" "A blessing," Marcus said simply, "and I want to pass it on." For the next hour, they worked out the details. The Marcus Williams Student Support Fund would be administered through the school, available to any child who needed help with basic necessities. No paperwork, no income verification, no waiting periods, just help when it was needed. "You know," Principal Johnson said as they finished, This is going to help a lot of families. I hope so. But Marcus, you should know something. What you are doing, it is going to get attention. People are going to ask questions about where the money came from, how you can afford to be so generous. Marcus thought about Robert Chen's words, about remembering that what looked like foolishness to the world might look like wisdom to God. Let them ask, he said. Word of the fund spread quickly through Jefferson Elementary. By the end of the week, Marcus had helped provide lunch for 6 different children, new shoes for a girl whose family had lost their home, and school supplies for a boy whose parents were between jobs. Some teachers praised his generosity. Others whispered about where a janitor had found the money to fund such a program. Marcus ignored both the praise and the suspicion, focusing instead on the gratitude in children's eyes and the relief on their parents' faces. It was the following Tuesday when the second miracle occurred. Marcus was cleaning the main hallway when Principal Johnson appeared at his side, her expression a mixture of excitement and bewilderment. Marcus, there is someone here to see you. In my office. Marcus followed her, wondering if Robert Chen had returned with more of his grandson's story. But the person waiting in the principal's office was a woman he had never seen before. She was perhaps 50 years old, professionally dressed, with kind eyes behind stylish glasses. Mr. Williams? My name is Patricia Morrison. I am the superintendent of schools for this district. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness. Yes, ma'am. Is there a problem? Quite the opposite. I am here because of the fund you started, the Marcus Williams Student Support Fund. Marcus glanced at Principal Johnson, who shrugged as if to say she had no idea where this was heading. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Williams, in my 23 years in education, I have seen a lot of good intentions. I have seen teachers and staff members try to help students in need, and I have seen programs come and go. But what you have done here is remarkable. I just wanted to help some kids, and you have. In less than 2 weeks, your fund has helped 18 children and their families. But more than that, you have inspired something I have not seen in years. She paused, studying his face. You have reminded an entire school community what it means to care for one another. Marcus waited, unsure of where this conversation was heading. Mr. Williams, I have a proposition for you. The district has an opening for a family liaison coordinator, someone who works with students and families facing hardship, connecting them with resources and support. It pays significantly more than your current position, comes with benefits, and would allow you to do officially what you are already doing unofficially. Marcus blinked. I don't understand. I am offering you a job, Mr. Williams. A real career, with a salary that would allow you to provide better for your daughter while still helping other families in need. The room seemed to spin slightly. Ma'am, I do not have a college degree. I barely finished high school. You have something more valuable than a degree, Mr. Williams. You have a heart for service and an understanding of what these families are going through. You have credibility that no amount of education can provide. She leaned forward. What do you say? Marcus looked at Principal Johnson, who was beaming with pride. He thought about Emma, about the drawing she had made of their family with her mother's angel wings. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's concern and Robert Chen's words about wisdom and foolishness. Yes, he said quietly. Yes, ma'am. I would be honored. The transition took several weeks, but by November, Marcus Williams had traded his janitor's uniform for business casual clothes, and his mop and bucket for a desk and computer. His new office was small but bright, with a window that looked out on the playground where Emma would start attending school the following year. His salary had nearly tripled, and for the first time since Sarah died, Marcus did not have to choose between paying bills and buying groceries. He moved Emma into a 2-bedroom apartment with a real kitchen and a yard where she could play. They went grocery shopping without checking prices, and Emma got new clothes that actually fit instead of hand-me-downs from Mrs. Rodriguez's granddaughters. But the most profound change was not financial. It was the sense of purpose that Marcus felt each day as he helped connect struggling families with resources and support. He worked with children who reminded him of Tommy Chen, with parents who carried the same weight of worry and pride that he knew so well. The Marcus Williams Student Support Fund continued to grow. Other staff members began contributing, and word spread to the community. Local businesses started donating, and by Christmas, the fund had helped over 100 children and their families. It was a few days before Christmas break when Tommy Chen appeared at Marcus's office door. "Mr. Williams, do you have a minute?" Marcus looked up from his computer and smiled. "Of course, Tommy. Come in." The boy looked different than he had 2 months ago. His clothes fit properly, his cheeks had filled out, and there was a brightness in his eyes that spoke of security and hope. Behind him stood a familiar figure. "Hello, Mr. Williams," said Robert Chen, extending his hand. "I hope you don't mind the interruption." "Not at all. What brings you by?" Tommy stepped forward, holding something in his hands. "I wanted to give you this, Mr. Williams." It was a handmade card, decorated with crayons and markers. On the front, Tommy had drawn a picture of a man with a mop and bucket, standing next to a small boy. Inside, in careful third-grade handwriting, he had written, "Thank you for being my angel when I needed one most. Love, Tommy." Marcus felt his throat close up. "Tommy, this is beautiful." "Grandpa says you saved my life," Tommy said seriously. "Is that true?" Marcus glanced at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. "I think maybe we saved each other, Tommy." Robert stepped forward. "Mr. Williams, I wanted you to know that David and I have worked things out. Our family is together again, and Tommy's father has a new job at one of my companies. But none of that would have happened if you had not shown us what real love looks like. All I did was buy a sandwich." "No," Robert said firmly. "You gave your last dollar to feed a hungry child. You chose faith over fear, generosity over security. You showed us that God still works through ordinary people who make extraordinary choices." That evening, Marcus sat on his new couch in his new apartment, watching Emma decorate their Christmas tree with ornaments she had made at school. The tree was small and slightly lopsided, but to Marcus, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. "Daddy," Emma said, hanging a construction paper angel near the top, "Mrs. Garcia says, Christmas is about God giving us the best gift ever. What do you think the best gift is?" Marcus thought about the past few months, about Tommy's tears and Robert's check and Patricia Morrison's job offer, about Mrs. Rodriguez's kindness and Principal Johnson's support, and all the children who no longer went to bed hungry because of a fund that had started with $500 and a heart full of hope. "I think the best gift is knowing that we are loved, sweetheart, and knowing that we can love other people too." Emma nodded sagely. "Like how you love me, and I love you, and Mommy loves us from heaven?" "Exactly like that. And like how God loves everybody?" "Yes, Emma, just like that." As Emma continued decorating, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a struggling janitor, counting pennies and wondering how to make it through another week. Tonight, he was a man with purpose, a job that mattered, and a daughter who would never have to go to bed hungry again. But more than that, he understood now what Mrs. Garcia had been trying to tell Emma about Christmas gifts. The greatest gift was not the money, or the job, or even the security they now enjoyed. The greatest gift was the reminder that God had been watching all along, waiting for the right moment to show that no act of kindness, no matter how small, ever went unnoticed. On Christmas morning, Emma woke Marcus before dawn, bouncing on his bed with excitement. Under their little tree were presents they had picked out together. Simple things that would have been impossible just months before. New books for Emma, art supplies, a warm coat for the winter. But the gift that meant the most to Marcus was one Emma had made herself. It was another drawing, this one showing their apartment with both of them smiling in front of it. At the top, she had written in red crayon, "Our new home that God gave us because Daddy has a good heart." "Do you like it, Daddy?" Emma asked anxiously. Marcus hugged her tight, feeling tears of gratitude slip down his cheeks. It is perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. Later that morning, they drove to Mrs. Rodriguez's house for Christmas dinner. She had invited them to join her extended family. And as Marcus watched Emma playing with the other children, he marveled at how much their world had expanded. Mrs. Rodriguez pulled him aside as they were cleaning up after the meal. "You look different, Micho," she said with a knowing smile. "Happy, really happy." "I feel different," Marcus admitted. "Like maybe everything is going to be okay." "It was always going to be okay," she said gently. "You just had to have faith and wait for God's timing." That afternoon, Marcus and Emma visited Sarah's grave. It was something they did every Christmas, bringing flowers and telling her about their year. The cemetery was quiet, covered in a light dusting of snow that made everything look peaceful and clean. "Mommy," Emma said, kneeling beside the headstone, "Daddy got a new job helping kids, and we have a new apartment, and there is always food in our refrigerator now." Marcus smiled, listening to his daughter's earnest recitation of their blessings. "And Daddy says you are watching over us from heaven," Emma continued. "Do you think that is true, Daddy?" Marcus looked at the angel carved into Sarah's headstone, at the way the winter sunlight seemed to make it glow. "I think your mommy is very proud of us, Emma, and I think she had something to do with all the good things that have happened." As they drove home that evening, Emma fell asleep in her car seat, clutching the little stuffed bear that had been Sarah's gift to her on her last Christmas. Marcus glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this little girl who had been his anchor through the darkest times, and felt a peace that had eluded him for years. The months that followed brought new challenges and new opportunities. Marcus's work with struggling families continued to grow, and the Student Support Fund expanded to serve 3 other schools in the district. He spoke at conferences about innovative approaches to helping children in need, always emphasizing that the most important qualification was not education or training, but simply caring enough to act. Tommy Chen stopped by his office regularly, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to help with projects for other students. The boy thrived in his reunited family, but he never forgot the janitor who had given his last dollar when it mattered most. "Mr. Williams," Tommy said one spring afternoon, "my grandfather wants to do something bigger with the fund. He wants to create a foundation." Marcus looked up from the paperwork he was reviewing. "What kind of foundation?" "One that helps kids all over the state. He says, what you started here should not be limited to just our school." The idea both thrilled and intimidated Marcus. "Tommy, that sounds wonderful, but I am not sure I am the right person to run something that big." "Grandpa says you are exactly the right person. He says God does not call the equipped, He equips the called." Within a year, the Marcus Williams Foundation for Student Support had launched in 50 schools across 3 states. Marcus found himself traveling to training conferences and speaking to groups of educators and community leaders. But no matter how far the foundation grew, he never forgot the fundamental truth that had started it all. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. Emma thrived in her new school, making friends easily and excelling in her studies. She often helped Marcus with foundation events, charming donors with her easy smile and natural compassion. At 9 years old, she already understood that their blessings came with responsibility. "Daddy," she said one evening, as they were reviewing applications for emergency assistance, "do you think Mommy knows about all the kids we are helping?" Marcus paused in his reading. "What do you think?" "I think she does. And I think she is happy that something good came from something sad." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze him. "You might be right about that, sweetheart." 2 years after that first desperate evening when Marcus had given Tommy his last dollar, Jefferson Elementary held a special assembly. Marcus stood before a packed auditorium filled with students, teachers, and community members, preparing to speak about the foundation's impact. But as he looked out at the crowd, he found himself thinking not about statistics or success stories, but about faith. About the mysterious ways that God worked through ordinary people facing impossible circumstances. About how sometimes what looked like foolishness to the world was actually divine wisdom in disguise. 2 years ago, Marcus began, I was a janitor struggling to make ends meet. I had $1 to my name, and I gave it away to feed a hungry child. People called me foolish. They said I was not thinking clearly, that I had my own family to worry about. The auditorium was completely quiet, and they were right in a way. From a practical standpoint, giving away my last dollar made no sense at all. But sometimes the right thing to do and the practical thing to do are not the same thing. Sometimes we have to choose between what makes sense to our heads and what makes sense to our hearts. Marcus paused, looking out at the faces watching him intently. I want to tell you what I have learned in these past 2 years. I have learned that God sees every act of kindness, no matter how small. I have learned that when we give what we can, even when it feels like nothing, God can turn it into something miraculous. I have learned that the question is not whether we have enough to share, but whether we have enough faith to trust that sharing is always the right choice. In the audience, he spotted Tommy Chen sitting with his grandfather, both of them beaming with pride. Near the back, Mrs. Rodriguez dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Principal Johnson nodded encouragingly from the side of the stage. The Marcus Williams Foundation has helped thousands of children in the past 2 years, Marcus continued. But it did not start with a foundation, or a mission statement, or a strategic plan. It started with one hungry child, and one person who decided that no child should go hungry if he could do something about it. It started with faith over fear, generosity over security, love over practicality. Marcus felt his voice growing stronger as he reached his conclusion. I stand here today not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who learned that sometimes you do not need to have all the answers. Sometimes you just need to do the next right thing and trust God with the results. Sometimes you need to give your last dollar and believe that somehow, some way, it will be enough. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was thinking about Emma, who had taught him about seeing good in the midst of loss, about Sarah, whose love had shaped him into the kind of man who would choose kindness over self-preservation, about all the children whose lives had been touched by a program that started with $1 and one moment of faith. After the assembly, as Marcus was packing up his materials, Principal Johnson approached him. That was beautiful, Marcus. Really beautiful. Thank you. Can I ask you something? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not given Tommy that dollar? If you had kept it for Emma's dinner instead? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes. And honestly, I think we would have figured something out that night. We always did. But Tommy might not have. And I would have missed out on the greatest lesson of my life. Which was? Marcus smiled, thinking of Emma's drawing that still hung on his office wall. The one showing their family with Sarah's angel wings and God's bright sun shining down on them all. That sometimes what looks like the end is actually the beginning. That sometimes losing everything is the first step toward finding what really matters. That God never wastes our pain or our struggles or even our mistakes. He just waits for the right moment to show us that he was working through it all along. That night, Marcus and Emma sat on their couch reading together, a tradition that had continued through all their changes and challenges. The book was one of Emma's favorites, about a little girl who learned to see magic in ordinary moments. Daddy, Emma said as they finished the last page, do you think our story is like a fairy tale? Marcus considered the question. What do you think? Well, fairy tales have sad parts and scary parts, but they always end with everything being okay, and the good people always get rescued by someone magical. That sounds about right. Emma snuggled closer to him. I think God is like the fairy godmother in our story. Except instead of sending a prince or a magic carriage, he sent Mr. Chen and the new job and all the kids we get to help. Marcus felt his heart swell with love for this wise little girl who had inherited her mother's insight and her father's faith. You know what, sweetheart? I think you are exactly right. As he tucked Emma into her bed that night, Marcus reflected on the long journey that had brought them to this place of peace and purpose. The path had not been easy, and there had been moments when he had wondered if faith was enough to sustain them. But looking back now, he could see the careful orchestration of events that had led them from desperation to hope, from poverty to purpose, from isolation to community. The Marcus Williams Foundation continued to grow, touching lives across the country and inspiring similar programs in other communities. But for Marcus, the true measure of success was not in the numbers or the accolades. It was in the children who no longer went to bed hungry, the families who found help in their darkest moments, the community that had learned to care for its most vulnerable members. Years later, when Emma was grown and had children of her own, she would tell them about their grandfather's moment of faith, about the night he gave away his last dollar and trusted God with the consequences, about how that single act of generosity had created ripples that touched thousands of lives and changed the trajectory of their entire family. But she would also tell them about the deeper truth that Marcus had learned in that school hallway all those years ago, that miracles do not always come in the form of dramatic interventions or sudden windfalls. Sometimes miracles look like ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Sometimes they look like kindness in the face of scarcity, faith in the midst of fear, love when logic says to look away. And sometimes, if you are very lucky and very faithful, those small miracles grow into something larger than you ever dared to imagine. Something that reminds the world that God still works through broken people in impossible circumstances, turning their weakness into strength, their poverty into abundance, their questions into testimonies of His unfailing love. The story of Marcus Williams and his last dollar became legend in their small town, passed down from teacher to student, from parent to child, from one generation to the next. But Marcus himself remained humble about his role in it all, always insisting that he had simply been in the right place at the right time, with the right heart. God did not need me to feed Tommy that day, he would say when people called him a hero. He could have provided in 100 different ways, but he chose to let me be part of the miracle, and that was the real gift. Not just to Tommy, but to me. Because sometimes the greatest blessing is not in receiving what you need, but in being used to provide what someone else needs. Sometimes the miracle is not in being rescued, but in being allowed to do the rescuing. Sometimes God's greatest gift is simply the opportunity to reflect His love to a world that desperately needs to see it. And sometimes, when you give your last dollar in faith, God gives you back a fortune in purpose, peace, and the profound joy of knowing that your life has mattered in ways you never dreamed possible. Sometimes, what looks like the end of your resources is actually the beginning of God's provision. Sometimes, losing everything is the first step toward finding what you were always meant to have. In the end, Marcus Williams learned that there are two kinds of wealth in this world. There is the kind that fills your bank account, and there is the kind that fills your heart. And while both have their place, only one can sustain you through the darkest nights and carry you toward the brightest dawn. He had given his last dollar to a hungry child, and God had given him a lifetime of purpose in return. It was more than a fair trade. It was a miracle disguised as an ordinary Tuesday evening in an empty school hallway, proving once again that the God of the universe still delights in turning foolishness into wisdom, poverty into abundance, and broken hearts into fountains of hope for a world that so desperately needs to believe in miracles again.